isn't compromised.
Isn't compromised, and you put in measures which acknowledge all the factors, because now we know from studies that have been produced even by Dr. Douglas Allen of Simon Fraser University, who looked at 80 studies over a year ago, which showed that the cure was worse than the disease. In other words, the lockdowns caused so many problems on the other side that was difficult to justify the measures that were being used.
Okay, now you alluded to the fact too that this isn't in some sense common public knowledge, and then along with that, we're faced with the extreme oddity, I would say, of the fact that the venue that you chose to announce this move and to discuss all these issues isn't a standard news media venue. It's my YouTube channel. And one of the things that you discussed with me earlier this week was the impossibility, in your view, of having these topics dealt with in an honest and straightforward manner by any major news organization in Canada, which to me is almost an statement damning the current larger scale governance structure, which in some sense includes a free press operating in a coherent and articulate and trustworthy manner as a check and an opportunity for reflection on the political process. And so that in itself seems as worrisome as all the other things that we're talking about at a governmental level. Like, I think this is preposterous in some sense that this is the place where this discussion is taking place. And so...
Yes, no, I think you raise an extremely important point, and one that I need to address. And I've been vocal about being concerned about what's happening for quite some time, and I've held public meetings here on Vancouver Island and Vancouver in front of the Art Gallery last October. And I've written letters to national newspapers, and they have not carried any of my letters, which is quite unusual, because before this happened, they would carry my letters when I made comment on normal public policy issues across the nation. And they carried my letters. But in recent times, they have not even acknowledged that they received them. And
so how do you account for that? What's going on?
Well, it seems to me that the media very early on bought into the government narrative and developed the same kind of fear that a lot of individuals did because of what they was being told. All was being proposed with all these cases, even though these cases didn't represent hospitalizations or ICU visits or whatever. And so there was a fear generated early on, and the mainstream media bought into it very quickly, and now are out trying to sustain the narrative that they became a part of early on. Is the only way I can explain it. Of course, we also know that all the mainstream media have received significant sums of money from the government of Canada over the last 3 years, over $600 million. So one cannot but mention that in any discussion like this, that one has to ask the question, has this flow of money from the federal government to the Canadian press in any way impinged upon their impartiality to tell the story on both sides of the issue?
What do you expect is going to happen as a consequence of the challenge that you're mounting? And can you go into some details about the precise nature of the challenge? Because I still don't understand it completely by any means. Perhaps it's not understandable completely by any means, but you're obviously, with your legal team, you have a view of how this is likely to unfold. So what do you want to happen? And how serious a challenge is this to the claim of the government, in some sense, to have legitimate sovereignty?
Yes, I think this is very serious, because I think, first of all, you have to, as you know, in the legal system, specifically articulate in your lawsuit what it is you're making the lawsuit about. So you had to be specific. So we had to pick one area. We could have, freedom of expression, conscience, assembly, association, life, liberty, and so on. And we picked mobility and the federal government itself, because this, is the second largest country in the world.
Right.
Traveling by plane and train is extremely important for business and for the normal functioning of a nation. Remember,
for the maintenance of families and for
the maintenance of families. The country was formed by moving from east to west with a railway. I mean, our history is all, replete with that kind of stuff. So what we chose was this particular situation of this travel ban, which impacts every single Canadian in their movement to meet family and to conduct regular business. And so we thought this would be an area that we should highlight, and because we had to get specific. So I'm particularly the lawsuit challenging the government's program of banning travel by train and plane by Canadians. In other words, we can't travel across our own nation. And the Section 6 says mobility, the right of every Canadian to travel anywhere in Canada or leave Canada. That's what the section says. That's the exact words of Section. So therefore, that's what we are pursuing now in the courts in the next couple of days, in the next few weeks, and hopefully we'll get a decision. We're asking for an expedited decision in the next 3 or 4 months. So this will fundamentally challenge the approach that the federal government is taking on responding to this so-called pandemic. And therefore we'll put into question this whole notion of using Section 1 of the Charter to override these rights and freedoms. If us as First Ministers, Dr. Peterson, had wanted to just have protecting rights and freedoms that could easily be changed, we wouldn't have gone to the Constitution. We would have just said, put an act in the federal parliament and put acts in all the parliaments, and then up to the whim of the political party at the time to change it. We wanted to safeguard it so that it was beyond the whim of political machinations, and therefore could not be changed only in the most extreme circumstances. So what we're really concerned about, and what I'm really concerned about, is if our charter is not upheld and then honored, and these freedoms and rights honored, then and therefore we lose, the next time around when there's an emergency 2 or 3 years from now, or the government decides and declares that there is an emergency, they can use this as a precedent, and the charter becomes further diluted, and then our rights and freedoms as individuals has been destroyed, and that section of being a democracy is no more. That is the great danger. And so that's why it's very necessary for me to do what I'm doing. The other point about this is that 4 years after the Charter came in 1986, there was a case in the Supreme Court of Canada where the judges were forced to look at Section 1 because of the way the lawyer had constructed the case for his client. It's called the Oates test. And in that, the judges tried to describe what this Section 1 meant. And they did not a bad job, not as good as I thought they should do, but still a much better job. And it's really funny, the lower courts who have already looked at the Charter as it relates to what's going on have not used this Oates test, which is highly unusual.